The year was 2387, and Captain David Chen never thought he would be standing in front of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. His uniform was still torn from the final battle, and the cuts on his face hadn't even healed yet. But here he was, in the massive crystal chamber of the Galactic Council, surrounded by alien creatures he had been fighting just weeks ago. 3 years. That's how long the war had lasted. 3 long, terrible years that nearly wiped out both humans and aliens, and it all started because of a simple mistake. When human explorers first ventured into deep space, they accidentally crossed into sacred alien territory. The Zephyrians, a proud warrior race with blue-tinted skin and glowing eyes, saw this. As a direct insult to their ancestors, what should have been resolved with an apology turned into the bloodiest conflict in galactic history. The aliens had everything: better ships, stronger weapons, and technology that humans could only dream of. Their empire stretched across dozens of star systems, while humanity barely controlled 3 planets beyond Earth. Most human commanders tried to fight fire with fire. They built bigger guns, faster ships, and recruited more soldiers. But Captain Chen did something different, something that changed everything. While other officers studied battle plans, he studied the aliens themselves. He learned their language, not just the basic words, but the ancient ceremonial speech that only their priests used. He read their history books, watched their movies, and even learned their traditional songs. His fellow soldiers thought he was crazy. Why waste time learning about the enemy, they would ask. Just shoot them and be done with it.
Oh.
But Chen believed there was more to winning a war than just destroying your opponents. He wanted to understand what made them tick, what they feared, and most importantly, what they respected. The aliens weren't just mindless warriors. They had families, dreams, and a rich culture that went back thousands of years. They valued honor above everything else, and their society was built on ancient laws that even their emperor couldn't break. Chen spent months studying these laws, looking for something, anything, that might end the war without destroying both civilizations. Then came the final battle above Kepler 44, to be a small moon that had become the symbol of the entire conflict. The alien fleet was massive, over 200 ships arranged in perfect formation around their flagship. The humans had barely 50 vessels, most of them damaged from previous battles. Everyone knew this would be humanity's last stand, but instead of ordering his ships to attack, Chen did something that shocked everyone, including his own crew. He opened a communication channel to the alien flagship and began speaking in perfect ancient Zephyrian, not the modern version that translators could handle, but the sacred dialect that was older than human civilization itself. The alien fleet stopped moving. Even their weapons powered down as Chen's voice echoed across their communication systems. He was invoking the right of single combat, an ancient law that demanded personal duels between leaders when armies were equally matched. No Zephyrian emperor had faced such a challenge in over 3 centuries. Emperor Thaxilon, the supreme ruler of the alien empire, appeared on the view screen. His massive form was covered in ceremonial armor, and his eyes blazed with the fire that had conquered a dozen worlds. But Chen could see something else there too: surprise, and maybe even a hint of respect. "Human," the emperor said in his deep, rumbling voice. "You speak the old words. Do you understand what you ask?" "I understand completely, Your Imperial Majesty," Chen replied, using the formal address that showed he truly knew their customs. "I challenge you to single combat for the fate of both our peoples. Winner takes all, as the ancient laws demand."
Ow.
The alien nobles on the flagship were stunned. Some demanded that the emperor refuse this insult from a mere human, but the emperor himself was trapped by the very laws that made him powerful. 2. Refuse would be to show cowardice in front of his entire empire. His people would never follow a coward. The duel took place on the moon's surface, broadcast live to every ship in both fleets. The emperor was twice Chen's size and had trained in combat since childhood. His species was naturally stronger and faster than humans. By all logic, this should have been over in minutes, but Chen had spent those months of study learning more than just language and customs. He had watched thousands of hours of Zephyrian combat training, analyzing their fighting style, looking for patterns and weaknesses that even they didn't know they had. The battle lasted 6 grueling hours. The Emperor fought with the fury of a warrior born, but Chen fought with the patience of a scholar who had done his homework. Every move the Emperor made, Chen had seen before in training videos. Every attack pattern had been studied and countered. When the Emperor relied on brute strength, Chen used speed and technique. When the Emperor got angry and reckless, Chen stayed calm and calculated. In the end, it wasn't superior fighting skills that won the duel. It was understanding. Chen knew exactly when to strike and when to defend, not because he was a better warrior, but because he understood his opponent better than the opponent understood himself. When Emperor Thaxilin finally fell to his knees, exhausted and defeated, something incredible happened. Instead of demanding surrender, Chen helped the Emperor to his feet. He spoke the ancient words of respect between worthy opponents. The alien fleet surrendered immediately, not out of fear, but out of amazement. A human had not just defeated their emperor in fair combat, he had shown him honor in victory. This was something their own culture valued above all else, yet they had never expected to see it from an alien species. Now, according to the ancient galactic laws that governed such conflicts, Chen could claim any reward from the conquered empire. The Galactic Council had gathered to witness this historic moment, and they presented him with 3 options, each more valuable than the last. The first option was Princess Zerathine, the Emperor's eldest daughter and the greatest military mind of her generation. She had personally commanded entire fleets and never lost a single battle. Marrying her would give humanity access to advanced weapons technology and military strategies that could secure their place among the galactic powers. The second choice was Princess Valandra, known throughout the galaxy as both a brilliant scientist and skilled diplomat. Her research had revolutionized space travel, making journeys between stars faster and safer than ever before. Her connections reached into every corner of galactic society, and choosing her would open doors to trade agreements. Worth more money than most planets produced in a lifetime? Then there was the third option. Princess Neithala sat quietly in the corner of the great chamber, almost invisible among all the important dignitaries and powerful aliens. Was known throughout the galaxy as the Broken Princess, born with a rare condition that left her physically weak and seemingly unable to contribute anything meaningful to her society. Where her sisters were strong and commanding, she was frail and soft-spoken. Where they stood at the center of attention, she preferred shadows and quiet corners. Most people forgot she existed, and those who remembered her did so with pity rather than respect. The choice seemed obvious to everyone watching. Any reasonable person would pick one of the first 2 princesses. The political advantages, the technological benefits, the strategic alliances, everything pointed to either Zerathine or Valandra. The entire chamber held its breath as Chen stood before the 3 options, the weight of humanity's future resting on his decision. Representatives from dozens of alien species waited to see what the human who had shocked them all would do next. And then, a voice that carried clearly through the vast chamber. Captain David Chen made the choice that would change galactic history forever. Captain David Chen looked at the 3 princesses standing before him. The massive crystal chamber was so quiet, you could hear the breathing of delegates from 40 different worlds. Everyone was waiting for what seemed like the most obvious decision in galactic history. Princess Zerathine stood tall and proud in the center, her military uniform perfectly pressed despite the recent end of hostilities. She was everything you'd expect. From a warrior princess, strong, confident, and commanding. Her reputation preceded her across the galaxy. She had led the 4th Zephorian fleet through 12 major battles and never lost a single engagement. Her tactical genius was legendary. Military academies on dozens of worlds studied her strategies. If Chen chose her, humanity would gain access to military technology that was centuries ahead of anything they currently possessed, energy shields that could protect entire cities, and most importantly, the respect of every military power in the galaxy. She represented strength, security, and a future where Humans would never again be seen as weak newcomers to galactic society. Standing beside her sister was Princess Valandra. Equally impressive, but in a completely different way. Where Zarathene commanded through force, Valandra influenced through intellect. She had revolutionized faster-than-light travel with her breakthrough research, cutting journey times between distant stars from months to mere weeks. Her scientific innovations had improved life for billions of beings across the galaxy. But perhaps, even more valuable, were her diplomatic connections. Valandra had personal relationships with leaders from every major galactic power. She could open doors that would otherwise remain closed to humanity for generations. Trade routes, research partnerships, cultural exchanges, all of this would become possible with a single word from her.
Ow.
Choosing her meant prosperity, knowledge, and acceptance into the galactic community as equals rather than conquered subjects. Both choices made perfect sense. Any military strategist would recommend Zarathene. Any economist would push for Valandra. The human diplomatic team had already prepared celebration speeches for either option, knowing that both would secure humanity's future among the stars. Then there was Princess Nathala. She sat in a simple chair at the edge of the great chamber, almost forgotten among all the important dignitaries and powerful politicians. Her pale blue skin seemed almost transparent under the chamber's bright lights, and her thin frame made her look fragile compared to the robust aliens surrounding her. She wore no military decorations like her sister Zarathene, and carried no scientific instruments like Valandra. In fact, she seemed to have nothing at all to offer. The galactic media had dubbed her the Broken Princess years ago, and the name had stuck. She suffered from a rare genetic condition that left her physically weak and often ill. While her sisters conquered worlds and discovered new technologies, Nathala spent most of her time in quiet study, reading books that most people considered boring and working on projects that never seemed to amount to anything. Most aliens felt sorry for her. Here was a princess who couldn't fight, couldn't lead armies, couldn't negotiate treaties, and couldn't contribute to her empire in any meaningful way. She was kept around out of family loyalty, but everyone knew she was basically useless. Choosing her would be like choosing nothing at all. The smart money was definitely on Princess Zarathene. The betting pools that had sprung up across the galaxy had her as the overwhelming favorite, with odds of 10-1 in her favor. Princess Valandra was the second choice at 20-1. As for Princess Nathala, the odds were so high that most bookmakers weren't even accepting bets on her. Captain Chen walked slowly in front of all three princesses, his hands clasped behind his back as if he was reviewing troops before a battle. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Alien diplomats held their breath. Human representatives nervously checked their prepared statements. Even the Emperor himself leaned forward in his throne, curious to see which of his daughters would be chosen to seal the peace between their peoples. Chen stopped first in front of Princess Zarathene. She met his gaze directly, warrior to warrior, her eyes blazing with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. For a moment, everyone thought the decision was made. The human delegation began to smile. The alien military commanders nodded with approval. But then Chen moved on. He paused briefly before Princess Valandra, who regarded him with the calculating gaze of a scientist studying an interesting specimen. She smiled slightly, perhaps knowing that logic and reason favored her selection. The diplomatic corps from both sides prepared to spring into action, ready to begin negotiations on the countless agreements that would follow such a choice. But Chen didn't stop there either. Instead, he walked to the far corner of the chamber where Princess Nathala sat quietly, her large luminescent eyes downcast as if she was trying to make herself invisible. When Chen stopped directly in front of her, she looked up with surprise, clearly not expecting any attention at all. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Alien nobles whispered to each other in a dozen different languages, all asking the same question: what was the human doing? Human diplomats frantically consulted their briefing materials, wondering if Chen had made some kind of mistake. "You choose." "May," Princess Nathala whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing noise in the chamber. She seemed genuinely shocked, as if the possibility had never occurred to her. Chen nodded and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the vast space. I choose Princess Nithala as my reward, and I ask for nothing else." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the chamber seemed to gasp at once. Emperor Thaxilon's eyes widened in complete surprise. Clearly, this was the last thing he had expected. Princess Zerathine looked confused, perhaps even slightly insulted that she hadn't been chosen. Princess Valandra raised an eyebrow, her scientific mind already trying to calculate the reasoning behind such an apparently illogical decision. The galactic media. Representatives went crazy, their recording devices buzzing as they tried to capture every angle of this historic moment. Within minutes, the news would be spreading across the galaxy. The human hero who had defeated the mighty Zephyrian Empire had chosen the weakest possible reward. The human diplomatic team looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Years of careful planning and preparation had just been thrown out the window. Instead of gaining powerful military allies or valuable scientific partnerships, humanity had apparently chosen a princess who couldn't even stand up without help. Alien nobles began whispering about hidden insults and secret meanings. Some suggested that Chen was mocking the Zephyrian royal family by choosing their weakest member. Others wondered if humans were simply too primitive to understand the value of what they were giving up. A few even questioned whether Chen had suffered some kind of brain injury during his duel with the Emperor. Through it all, Princess Nithala sat in stunned silence, staring up at the human captain who had just changed her life forever. When Chen extended his hand to help her stand, she took it hesitantly, as if she couldn't quite believe this was really happening. As she rose to her feet with surprising grace, those closest to them caught a glimpse of something unexpected. For just a moment, there was a flash of something in her eyes, not the confusion of a simple, weak princess, but a depth of intelligence that seemed completely at odds with her reputation. "Why?" she asked quietly, speaking directly to Chen while the chamber continued to buzz with shocked conversations around them. Chen smiled and leaned closer, speaking in the ancient Zephyrian dialect he had mastered. "Because I know who you really are." The words sent a visible shiver through the princess. And for the first time since entering the chamber, she truly looked directly into his eyes. What passed between them in that moment was subtle, but unmistakable. The recognition of one intelligent mind acknowledging another, and suddenly, the choice that had seemed so foolish to everyone else began to look like something entirely different altogether. 3 months had passed since the wedding ceremony that shocked the galaxy. Captain David Chen was beginning to understand that he had made either the smartest decision of his life or the most dangerous one. He and Princess Nithala were now living together aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge. It's a massive ship designed to house representatives from both human and alien governments as they worked out the details of their new peace treaty. At first, everything seemed exactly as everyone expected. Princess Nithala appeared to be the same weak, fragile creature that the galaxy knew her to be. She spent most of her time in their shared quarters, reading quietly or working on what appeared to be simple crafts and hobbies. She rarely spoke. During official dinners, and when she did, her voice was soft and hesitant. The other diplomats treated her with polite kindness. It's the way you might treat a sick child. But Chen had been watching carefully, and small things were starting to add up in ways that didn't make sense. The first clue came during a technical malfunction in the ship's navigation system. The human and alien engineers had been working on it for hours, unable to figure out what was wrong. Chen happened to be walking past their quarters when he heard Nithala mumble something under her breath. It sounded like technical jargon, but when he asked her about it, she just smiled shyly and said she was reading a story about space travel. 20 minutes later, the engineering team announced they had found the solution, the exact same solution that Nithala had quietly described to herself. The second clue was her books. Chen had assumed she was reading simple novels or poetry, the kind of light entertainment that someone with limited education might enjoy. But one day, when she stepped away for a moment, he glanced at what she was reading. It was a complex theoretical physics textbook written in a dialect, so advanced that even the ship's translators couldn't handle it properly. When she returned and saw him looking at the book, she quickly closed it and apologized for leaving it out. "I know it looks complicated," she said, with that same shy smile. I just like looking at the pictures and trying to guess what they mean. Chen had seen enough of those pictures to know they weren't simple illustrations. They were mathematical. Equations that described how faster-than-light travel worked, theories that only the most brilliant scientists in the galaxy could understand. The third clue came during a security briefing about potential threats to the peace process. The human security chief was explaining how certain radical groups might try to disrupt the negotiations. When Nithala quietly excused herself, saying the talk of violence made her uncomfortable. But as she left, Chen heard her whisper something. To herself, that sounded like a detailed analysis of security weaknesses that the briefing had completely missed. By the 4th month, Chun was certain that his wife was not what she appeared to be. But he needed proof, and more importantly, needed to understand why she was hiding her. True abilities, the opportunity came during a diplomatic crisis that threatened to destroy the entire peace process. A group of radical Zephyrians had stolen a human transport ship and were threatening to use it in an attack that would make it look like humans had broken the peace treaty. Both sides were preparing for war again. The situation was spiraling out of control rapidly. The combined human and alien command staff worked around the clock, trying to find a solution. They tracked the stolen ship, analyzed the terrorists' demands, and ran countless computer simulations trying to predict their next move. But every plan they came up with had serious flaws, and time was running out. That night, Chen found Nithala in their quarters, sitting in front of what he had always assumed was a simple entertainment screen. But instead of watching movies or reading, the screen was filled with data streams, tactical displays, and communication intercepts that should have been classified at the highest levels. "How did you get access to this information?" he asked. Quietly, she looked up at him with those large, innocent eyes. But this time, Chen saw something different in them. The mask was starting to slip. I was just curious about what was happening," she said, but her voice lacked the usual hesitation. "Nithala," Chen said, sitting down beside her. "I know you helped me escape from that Zephyrian prison 3 years ago." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Her entire body went still like a wild animal that had just been discovered by a predator. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then slowly she began to change. It started with her posture. The hunched, fragile way she usually held herself straightened into something confident and strong. Her pale, translucent skin began to gain color and vitality. Her thin frame filled out, revealing lean but powerful muscles that had been hidden beneath the illusion of weakness. Most startling of all, her eyes lost their soft, confused expression and blazed with an intelligence so sharp it was almost frightening. "You remember the maintenance worker who showed you the way out?" she said, and her voice was now steady and confident, completely different from the soft whisper everyone was used to hearing. The one who knew exactly which guards would be where and exactly when the security systems would cycle through their weak points. Chen nodded. "I always wondered how a simple maintenance worker could have that kind of detailed knowledge about a high-security military prison." Nithala stood up, and Chen realized she was nearly 6 inches taller than her disguised form had. "Appeared to be because I designed the security system for that prison, and about 40 others like it across the Zephyrian Empire." The truth hit Chen like a physical blow. "You're not the broken princess everyone thinks you are," she confirmed, walking over to what appeared to be a simple wall panel. She placed her hand against it, and suddenly, the entire wall transformed into a complex display showing real-time data from across the galaxy. "I'm the person who's been 3 steps ahead of everyone else for the past 10 years. Chen stared at the displays in amazement. They showed military positions, resource flows, political movements, and communication patterns from dozens of different species. In the center of it all was a quantum computer that was apparently calculating probabilities for thousands of different scenarios simultaneously. "This whole room," he breathed, looking around at what he had thought were simple living quarters. "It's all a disguise. The room, the personality, the physical appearance, all of it," she confirmed. "I needed to be invisible to do what had to be done, which was end a war that was going to destroy both our civilizations, and then begin the work of preventing future wars from ever starting." She gestured to one of the displays which showed a complex web connecting hundreds of worlds. The current system of endless conflict between species is unsustainable. Someone had to break the cycle. Chen understood now why she had disguised herself as the weakest princess. It had allowed her to work without the expectations and limitations that came with being recognized as a dangerous political player. While her sisters played their roles as the obvious powers within the royal family, she had been free to pursue solutions that required thinking far beyond conventional political or military frameworks. The stolen ship situation, he said suddenly. You already know how to resolve it. She smiled, and Chen finally saw the real person beneath the disguise, brilliant, confident, and utterly committed to goals that dwarfed any military victory. I know where they're going, what they're planning, and exactly how to stop them without a single shot being fired. Then why haven't you told the command staff? Because Princess Nathala, the broken, weak creature everyone thinks I am, couldn't. Possibly no such things, she explained. But you could discover the solution. The hero who ended the war through understanding rather than violence. Chen realized that once again his wife was thinking several moves ahead of everyone else. She could solve the crisis, but only by working through him to maintain her cover. Looking at her now, brilliant, powerful, and completely dedicated to preventing galactic warfare, Chen finally understood what he had really chosen when he picked the weakest princess. He hadn't selected a reward at all. He had chosen a partner who could help him reshape the entire galaxy. As Princess Nathala revealed her true capabilities to Captain Chen, the scope of her plan became absolutely mind-blowing. What he thought was just a brilliant strategy to end one war was actually something much bigger, a carefully orchestrated, game played across 3 years and 12 star systems, with her moving both sides like pieces on a cosmic chessboard, standing in what he now realized was the most advanced command center he had ever seen. Ships moving between star systems, political meetings happening on distant worlds, trade negotiations, military exercises. Everything was being monitored and analyzed by systems that made human technology look like stone tools. This war never had to happen, Nathala explained, her fingers dancing across control panels that responded to her touch like musical instruments. But it was the only way to achieve what both our species needed: true understanding and respect for each other. Chen shook his head in amazement. You're telling me you started this war on purpose? Not started, she corrected, pulling up a 3-dimensional map that showed the positions of both human and alien fleets over the past 3 years. Guided. The conflict was inevitable the moment humans ventured into our territory. Too expanding. Civilizations with completely different cultures were bound to clash eventually, but I could control how that clash played out. Chen watched in fascination as patterns emerged, patterns he had never noticed during the actual fighting. Every major engagement, every strategic victory, every apparent stroke of luck had been carefully orchestrated to lead to one specific outcome. The Zephyrian Empire was dying. Nathala continued, highlighting sectors of space on the map where alien colonies were struggling. We had expanded too fast, made too many enemies, and spread our resources too thin. Meanwhile, humanity was growing stronger every day, developing new technologies and exploring new territories. Eventually, you would have become powerful enough to threaten not just us, but every established civilization in the galaxy. So you decided to have us fight each other instead of letting us become enemies later? I decided to have you fight each other in a way that would force both sides to truly understand what they were dealing with, she said. Most galactic conflicts end in total domination. One side completely destroys the other. But that wasn't going to work here. Humanity was too resilient to be completely crushed, and the Zephyrian Empire was too proud to simply surrender. Chen was beginning to see the bigger picture. You needed a different kind of victory, one that both sides could accept with honor. Exactly. And that required finding the right person on the human side, someone who could see beyond surface appearances, and understand that true strength comes from wisdom, not just firepower. She turned to look at him directly. Someone who would spend months studying enemy culture instead of just building bigger weapons. The realization hit Chen like a lightning bolt. You were testing me. The whole war was a test to see if I could learn to think differently about conflict. Nathala smiled. Chen saw in her expression the satisfaction of a teacher whose student had finally grasped a difficult concept. Every battle you fought, every strategy you developed, every cultural detail you learned, I was watching, and evaluating. I needed to know if humans were capable of the kind of thinking that could break the cycle of endless galactic warfare. She gestured to another display, which showed a complex web connecting hundreds of different worlds and species. The current system is completely unsustainable. 17 different intelligent species, all locked in various stages of conflict with each other. Resources being wasted on weapons instead of exploration and development. Entire civilizations teetering on the edge of collapse because they can't see past their immediate territorial disputes. That's why I needed a partner. Someone from outside the existing power structure who could help implement changes that the established governments would never accept from one of their own. Chen looked around the hidden command center, finally understanding the true scope of what his wife had been planning. This isn't just about ending the war between humans and Zephyrians. You're talking about completely restructuring how intelligent species interact with each other across the entire galaxy. The marriage between us creates a precedent, she explained, highlighting connections on the galactic map. It proves that different species can not only coexist peacefully, but actually benefit from combining their unique strengths and perspectives. But more than that, it gives us the political protection we need to start implementing real changes. She walked over to what appeared to be a simple wall, but when she touched it, the surface transformed into a massive planning board covered with timelines, resource calculations, and political analyses that stretched decades into the future. A new form of governance, she continued, based on voluntary cooperation instead of conquest and domination. Species working together to solve common problems instead of fighting over limited resources. It will take generations to fully implement. But the foundation has to be laid now, while both our peoples are still grateful for peace and willing to try new approaches. Chen felt overwhelmed by the scope of her vision. You were talking about changing the fundamental nature of galactic civilization itself. Yes, and it has to start with us, she said, turning back to face him. Our marriage isn't just a symbol, it's a working laboratory where we can test and develop the cooperation models that other species will eventually adopt. Looking at the displays around them, Chen began to see how every detail had been planned, with incredible precision. The timing of the war, the selection of battles. Even his own personal journey from simple soldier to strategic thinker, it had all been designed to create exactly this moment and this opportunity. The stolen ship crisis, he said suddenly, remembering the current emergency that was threatening to restart the war. It's part of this too, isn't it? Neithala nodded grimly. A test of whether our new approach can handle real challenges. The radical groups trying to restart the conflict represent the old way of thinking. The belief that problems can only be solved through violence and domination. How we resolve this crisis will determine whether other species take our cooperation model seriously. Chen was amazed to see that she not only knew exactly where they were and what they were planning, but had apparently been tracking their activities for months. You knew this was going to happen? I knew something like this would happen, she corrected. There are always groups on both sides who profit from conflict and fear change. They were bound to try something to disrupt the peace process. But this gives us the perfect opportunity to demonstrate that there are better ways to solve problems than just shooting at each other. Chen studied the tactical information she was showing him. You already know how to stop them. Oh, I know several ways to stop them, she said with confidence. The question is, which approach will best serve our long-term goals? We could use military force and capture them quickly, but that would just reinforce the old pattern of solving problems through violence. Instead, we need to find a solution that shows the galaxy a better way forward. Looking at his wife, no longer disguised, no longer hiding her incredible intelligence and strategic capabilities, Chen finally understood the full scope of what he had gained by choosing the weakest princess. He hadn't just married someone who could help him personally succeed. He had chosen a partner in the most ambitious project in galactic history. So what happens next? He asked. Neithala smiled, and Chen could see in her eyes the same depth of planning and possibility that had first attracted his attention in that council chamber months ago. Now we save both our civilizations from another war, and then we get to work building something the galaxy has never seen before, a future where strength comes from cooperation instead of conquest. Chen realized that his journey was just beginning. The war hero who had defeated an emperor was about to become something much more important, an architect of galactic peace. 1 year after their marriage, Captain David Chen stood at the observation deck of the massive space station Unity Point, watching the most incredible sight in galactic history. Ships from 43 different species were docked together. In perfect harmony, their crews working side by side on projects that would have been impossible just months before. This was the first Galactic Cooperation Summit, and it was all because of a choice that everyone had thought was the worst mistake ever made. The transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. What started as a desperate attempt to prevent another war had grown into something that was changing the entire galaxy. The stolen ship crisis that had threatened to destroy the peace process became the first test of their new approach to solving problems. Instead of sending military forces to hunt down the terrorists, Chen and Nithala had done something completely different. They tracked down the families of the radicals, learned about their fears and concerns, and discovered that the real problem wasn't hatred between species, it was fear of being left behind in a rapidly changing galaxy. Working together, had developed a solution that no one saw coming. Instead of punishing the ship thieves, they offered them jobs. Real jobs with good pay, helping to build the new cooperation networks that were forming between human and alien worlds. The former terrorists became some of the most enthusiastic supporters of the peace process, because they finally felt like they had a place in the new galaxy that was being born. Word of this success spread quickly. Other species that had been watching the human Zephorian peace process with skepticism suddenly became very interested. If these two former enemies could not only stop fighting but actually turn their opponents into allies, maybe there was something worth learning here. Princess Seraphine, the military genius who everyone had expected Chen to choose, became one of their strongest supporters. I spent my entire life learning how to defeat enemies, she told Chen during one of their regular strategy meetings. My sister taught me something far more valuable, how to turn enemies into friends. She now commanded the first truly integrated multi-species peacekeeping force in galactic history. Ships from different worlds flew together in formations that would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago. When conflicts arose between species, instead of choosing sides, they worked together to understand the root causes and find solutions that benefited everyone involved. Princess Valandra had been skeptical at first when she saw the technological breakthroughs that were emerging from humans' Zephorian collaboration. She threw herself into expanding the model. Her diplomatic skills were now focused on bringing other species into what was becoming known as the cooperation web. The results were beyond anything anyone had imagined. Human creativity combined with Zephorian engineering had produced advances in medicine that were saving millions of lives across dozens of worlds. New forms of clean energy were ending resource shortages that had caused wars for centuries. Most importantly, different species were beginning to see each other not as competitors to be defeated, but as partners with unique abilities that could solve problems none of them could handle alone. Even Emperor Thaxilon, who had initially been furious about losing the war, had become one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the new system. I spent decades trying to build an empire by conquering other worlds, he admitted during a public address that was broadcast across the galaxy. My daughter showed me how to build something much better, a partnership where everyone wins. The real proof of Nithala's vision came in the numbers that Chen was now seeing displayed on screens throughout Unity Point. Star systems that had been locked in endless conflict for centuries were experiencing unprecedented peace and prosperity. Trade between former enemies had increased by over 400% in just 1 year. Most remarkably, the galaxy's total military spending had dropped by 60% as species realized they no longer needed massive armies to protect themselves from their neighbors. You know what the most incredible part is? Chen said to his wife as they watched delegates from the Andranian Republic and the Stellar Federation, who had been bitter enemies for over 200 years, signing their first-ever trade agreement. What's that? Nithella asked, though Chen could see in her eyes that she already knew what he was going to say. Nobody calls you the broken princess anymore, was true. The galactic media, which had once mocked her as the weakest member of the royal family, now referred to her as the architect of peace, or the galaxy's greatest strategic mind. Her transformation from hidden genius to respected leader had been gradual, but undeniable. But more importantly, she was no longer hiding. The disguise that had allowed her to work in secret was no longer necessary. The new galactic order she had envisioned was becoming reality, and she could finally be recognized for who she truly was. The galaxy I grew up in was built on the idea that resources were limited, and that meant different species had to fight each other for survival. Chen reflected as they walked through Unity Point's main corridor, where beings from dozens of worlds worked together on projects that were literally reaching for the stars. Scarcity was never the real problem, Nithella replied, her hand in his as they passed laboratories where human and alien scientists were developing technologies that neither species could have created alone. The problem was perspective. When you see others as enemies to be defeated, you limit yourself to whatever you can take from them. When you see them as potential partners, you gain access to everything you can create together. Their own relationship had become the template that other species were beginning to follow. The human soldier and the alien princess had proven that the greatest strength came not from domination, but from the wisdom to recognize and develop the hidden potential in others. The unity. Point Station itself was a perfect example. Built using combined human and Zephyrian technology, it was more advanced than anything either species could have constructed separately. Its laboratories were producing medical breakthroughs that were saving lives across the galaxy. Its meeting halls were hosting negotiations that were ending conflicts that had raged for generations. As Chen watched a group of former enemies working together to design new exploration ships that would search for habitable worlds where any species could settle, he finally understood the full scope of what he had gained by choosing Nithella. Had thought he was selecting the weakest possible reward, but he had actually chosen the architect of a completely new type of galactic civilization. So, he said, turning to his wife as they reached their private quarters, overlooking the busy docking bays where ships from across the galaxy came and went in peaceful cooperation. What's our next impossible project? Nithella smiled, and Chen could see in her eyes the same depth of planning and ambition that had first caught his attention in that council chamber. I've been analyzing some interesting signals from outside our galaxy, she said casually, as if she was discussing the weather. The Andromeda Galaxy seems to have developed its own form of intelligent life. They've been trying to establish contact. Chen laughed, realizing that his adventure was far from over. The woman everyone had thought was the weakest princess had already solved the problem of war within their own galaxy. Now she was setting her sights on building bridges between entire galactic civilizations in the end. The human soldier's choice had surprised everyone, including himself, not because he had chosen poorly, but because he had chosen so incredibly well that it took the entire galaxy months to understand just how brilliant his decision had been. The weakest princess had given him the strongest possible foundation for a future that neither humans nor aliens could have imagined alone. And as Chen looked out at the peaceful, prosperous galaxy they had helped create together, he knew that the best was yet to come.